Yes, here we are. Hello, hello, and welcome. Probably you already know that today is about image transfers on the gel plate using magazine images. So let me tell you a little bit about the image transfers. I think it's about 2 years ago that I discovered this technique, and it basically was by accident because I was doing some gel printing, and sometimes I just place a piece of paper, a sheet of paper on top of the paper that I'm printing on, if the paper I'm printing on is a little bit smaller than my gel plate, just to make sure that my hands don't get dirty. So one day I did that with a sheet of a magazine image, and when I pulled up the image from the magazine, I saw that some of the text from the image stayed behind on the gel plate. So of course that was something that I got really excited about, and so I tried many different ways to find out the best way to do it, and it's very tricky. It's not an easy technique when you don't know how to do it. So once you figured out how to do it, it's not really that difficult, but it takes a lot of experimenting to find out how it works, and it's really, really hard to explain because there are so many things that are involved to get good prints, and that goes from the paper you print with, but also the paper you print on. It has to do with the paint that you're using. It has to do with how hard you rub on the paper. It has to do with the temperature or the humidity in your room, and so you really have to figure out what works best for you. So I could tell you the magazines I tried in the Netherlands that work, and some of them are international magazines like Vogue or Elle, or there are a couple more, but it has to do with the way the magazine is printed and the paper that it's printed on. So maybe I could tell you that Vogue is working for me, but if you are in the US and you buy a Vogue there, it might not work because maybe in the US it's printed with different ink or it's printed on different paper. So it really you really have to figure out for yourself what works. But today I'm going to try and explain and show to you the most important things you have to keep in mind. And so I'm going to turn the camera around, and then I'm going to show you as much as I can, as much as possible. So let me see, let me switch the camera. So here on my workspace, I already have a couple of samples made with from different magazines and with different colors of paint and ink, and so I'm going to walk you through the possibilities that there are, at least a couple of them, and then you have to experiment for yourself to see what works. First of all, let me say that this is such a tricky technique that I don't get good prints all the time either. So I would say that maybe 2 out of 4 or 2 out of 5 prints I get really excited about, that are prints that I really, really like and that I feel like they are worth going in my art journal. And the other 3 are either total failures, or they are good enough to become a background or to work on a little bit more. But I can assure you that today I will have some failures too. And maybe that helps for you, that to know that it is a hard technique and that I don't have 100% perfect prints all the time. So you don't think that, they work out all the time with me, and why, and what are you doing wrong. Sometimes you're not doing anything wrong, but it's just not working. And it's very hard to figure out what that is that makes that it doesn't work. But for me personally, I think the failures are worth the prints that turn out really nice, because they are so exciting, and so I so love the way they look, that it's worth all the failures. So that's first. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you both the different ways to do it. So the first thing that I found out was doing the prints with acrylic paint. And then because it was so hard, I've tried to figure out other ways to do the technique, and I came up with a technique where you use Stazon in your first layer. So that's a permanent stamping ink, and you use Stazon in your first layer, and it's actually an easier technique than the one with the acrylic paint. So I'm going to start with showing you some prints with text, like these, for instance, because with text, if your print is not turning out perfect, it will always still be something fun to use in the background. It doesn't have to be perfect. If there are pieces that you can't read, or where some of the letters are missing, it doesn't matter if it's going to be a mixed media, grungy background. So when you start doing this technique, it can be a good idea to first go for text prints, because it feels as if it's easier to do, and your results will be better, and you will be more encouraged to continue and go to the more difficult images. So first I'm going to show you the technique with the Stazon, because that's an easier technique, and I'm not really sure why it works better, but in my experience, the printing with the Stazon in the first layer works with more different magazines. I tried with the Stazon, I did prints with even newspaper and like really cheap brochures that came in the mail, and from very glossy magazines to the not so glossy magazines. All of them kind of worked with the Stazon, although I have to say that the magazines that are a little bit more glossy work a little bit better than the ones that are not so glossy, because the paper of the not so glossy magazines usually is more absorbent, and so it's harder to leave ink behind on the plate. So this is from a brochure from KLM, and I'm going to print some text and this little map here, because it's just something where there's a lot of contrast. That's also a reason why printing text works out really well a lot of times, because usually your text is just black and white, and that's the highest contrast you can get. And to get good results with image printing, you really need a lot of contrast. I noticed that the more contrast there is, the better your prints will be. And the reason, I think, I mean, it's not I had to figure it out myself, because no one had done it before. So I think that the darker ink in the print is resisting the paint and the ink on the plate, and the paper is actually absorbing the paint and the ink. So in the darker areas, in this case the text, the magazine paper will not pick up the ink from the plate and leave it behind, so you can make a second print pulling the ink that's left behind from the plate. To do the Stazon technique, I've seen people doing it without a second layer of paint that I'm about to add, and you can totally do that, but you will never get as crisp results as when you use the second layer that I'm about to apply. So you can try that if you want to. Just add the ink, put your paper on top, and then pull a print. I can actually do that, but I'm not going to do it with this print. I'm going to take another one. I'm going to do it, and so you can see the difference when I do the other one. So here my ink is still wet, and I'm placing my image on top, and I'm rubbing and picking up my paper to see how much of the ink is absorbed by my image, by my magazine paper, and if there's still enough ink left behind. So as you can see, clearly see that here's text and some photos, and now I can go ahead and pull a print. So, and there we go. So I'm pulling up the ink from the plate, but as you can see, there's still a lot of color also in the background. So you do see the photos, you do see that there is text, and this can be a pretty background if you want to work on it a little bit more. But what I want is that what was white in my magazine image, that it's also white in my print, or at least that the ink, the blue ink that's still here in the background, that is gone. So to get that, I need another layer to pull the print. So I'm just going to remove the ink that's left behind on the plate, because otherwise it will pull up in my next print, and then again it will not be a nice crisp and clean print. So I'm also drying my plate, because otherwise the ink gets too thin when the plate is still wet. So I'm going to apply again the Stazon, and you need a nice even layer of Stazon covering all of the plate, but don't continue doing this for too long, because when the ink starts to dry and you continue dabbing, you will just lift up the ink again instead of adding more to the plate. So you have to do it quite fast. And now this has to dry, and it takes a little while. So I'm doing this with the Stazon ink, because that's the quickest drying ink on the gel plate. You could totally do this with archival ink or the VersaFine ink, but that dries way slower than the Stazon. And I'm not a very patient person. You might know that by now. I'm not very patient, and I don't like to wait for ink and paint to dry. So that's why I use the Stazon. And besides that, I always have really good results with the Stazon. So that's also a good reason. So this needs to dry for a couple of minutes. And of course, I don't want to wait for it to dry. So I did some preparation, and I'm going to put this one aside for a later print. And I have a smaller one here with the black Stazon, and you can totally use any color of Stazon. although I prefer the darker colors because they show up better in the prints. But my favorites are the jet black and the midnight blue that I just applied to the previous plate. But you can also get really nice results. For instance, if you take a hot pink or something and then pick up the print with white paint, you can also get really nice results. So this one is dry already. And how do I know that it's dry? Well, first of all, because it's been laying there for about an hour, and so it definitely has to be dry. But you can also see that it's not shiny, not really shiny anymore. If it's still wet, you can see when you turn it to the light that it has a shine that goes away when it's dry. But also you will notice when you do this more often that you kind of know how much time it needs to dry, and that can also be different in your area than in my area. So you have to figure that out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply a layer of paint to the dried ink. And I'm not going to apply it straight to the plate, but I'm going to roll it out on a separate sheet of paper. And that's because if my brayer touches the ink, it will just lift up the ink from the plate. The ink will just stick to my brayer. I have to make sure that the brayer is completely covered with wet paint before I go over my gel plate. So I'm going to roll out my paint on a separate sheet of paper and then apply it to the plate. And now I'm going to put my image on top, and I rub lightly from the middle to the edges. I don't want any air bubbles, because if there are air bubbles, you will not pull up the ink in the areas where there are air bubbles. So I'm carefully lifting up the paper to see how my transfer looks, and it needs a little bit more rubbing here because it's not really picking up the ink here down here. So I'm just putting it down again and rubbing some more. So it looks as if I just added a little bit too much paint here, because I don't know if you can see it, maybe if I pull it up. So here's still some white, and that basically means that there was too much paint. And for some reason my paint also looks a bit as if it's really thin. So maybe I should take another brand, but at least you can see there has been some transfer. And now I'm going to pull this print the same way as I would pull any dried paint from my plate. So that means I'm adding a very thin layer of paint, then putting my paper on top, and then pull the ink from the plate. So this is what I have now. And as you can see, it's not a perfect print, especially not down here, but I really kind of like this. It almost looks like it's an old, very old map or something. So I I don't know, I either had too much paint here or too much ink. I don't know what happened here, but as I said, my prints are also not always perfect, but it depends on what you consider perfect, right? Because this could, for you, could be a perfect print. It depends on what you're looking for. So let's try another one. And maybe it also could be that if I had used a different magazine for this particular print, that it would have turned out totally different because the paper of the magazine is different. But I'm definitely going to get another white paint because this one looks a bit weird. And let's make sure it's not the paint that's causing the problems. So, and then I have, let's see if the bigger one is dry already. Let me see. It looks still a tiny little bit wet, so just to be sure, I'm going to take another one that I prepared. And let's take some more text, like this maybe. And another fun thing to do is to combine text from different sheets with different sizes, and then also include the torn edge in the print. So let me get some more text. And some smaller text too. I think that should be enough to cover this plate. Let me put this one aside. And we can also use a different color. We don't have to print with white. So why don't we take a pale lemon for this one? Now I need to roll out again my paint on a different sheet of paper. And then apply a nice and thin layer. And then I have to be careful with the rubbing when I place my magazine on top. I have to be careful with the rubbing because this is a different magazine and it might need way less rubbing than the other one. You have to figure that out too. And it might be a good idea to write that down once you know how which magazine works very well and which needs a lot of rubbing and which one needs only a little bit of rubbing. You could write that down so you know, and you don't have to figure it out every time again when you start printing. So let's just pull this away and see how this turned out. So I think I have a little bit of, I had a little bit of an air bubble here, and I will show you when I pull the print what happens when you have air bubbles. But first let's pull this print. So now I can just add the paint straight to the plate because there's a little bit of paint on top of all the ink now, and it's totally fine. And again, make sure I can't say it enough, when you pull the print, make your layer of paint as thin as possible, because otherwise you will just pull up the top layer of paint and not the layer that's underneath on the plate. Okay, and here we go. Okay, so here's what happened. Air bubble, and here I rubbed too much. So there's not really, sorry, not really any text left. But still, I think a pretty cool print. But let's do some, let's do a face. Let's do something that's very recognizable. And let me show you how you can fix things. For instance, if you do a face, you can fix sometimes things before you even pull the print. I'm very sorry. Now let me find a good print. I have a whole bunch of pages here, and I'm going to look for one that has enough contrast. As the contrast is very important. Because the more contrast there is in a picture, the better the result will probably be. Black and white pictures usually are the best, but sometimes pictures like these also work very well. So let's just try this one. Let's see if we can make this one work. And now I suppose this one is dry enough. Yeah, let's try this one. First, we are going to add the layer of white paint again. Oh, and I had a little bit of a small area on my brayer that had no paint. I felt it when I put down my brayer on the plate that it stuck to the plate here. So I think there's a little area here where there's no ink left, but we'll see. So the hard thing when doing a live is that I can't go like really close to the plate with my head to see how it looks underneath the paper, because then I would look at my hair all the time. But I think this might actually turn out pretty well. Okay. I don't want to do any more rubbing. I don't want to. You have to be careful, because if you rub too much, you might rub away eyes or nose or something, and you don't want to rub away that. But I can see that here and here I had air bubbles, and they are in the face, and I don't want them. So what I can do is I can take my baby wipe or wet cloth, and I can just gently wipe that away. So I can clean it up a little bit wherever I want to. I think maybe here. And then, of course, you can also do a lot of work on the prints afterwards. You can totally kind of remove areas that you don't like afterwards. You can add to areas where something was lost using markers or pens or pencils. That would all work, but you can pretty much see already that this might be a really nice print, right? So now we step 1 worked out great. I have a nice transfer on the plate, and then step 2 comes, and step 2 is also scary because that's the one where you have to pull the print and you might add too much paint and not pull a perfect print, even though you have a perfect transfer. So it might still totally become a total failure, even though I have a really nice transfer here. But that's the risk you take when you do this technique. You have to be patient, you have to be prepared to have failures, and then every perfect print is just like it makes you feel really good if you have a really nice print. So besides the white paint, I'm also going to add a little bit of yellow. So I'm kind of adding another color to the print even before pulling the print. Of course, I can go in there afterwards adding color with different products, but I can also add color already in while I'm pulling the print. So again, careful, have to be careful with my paint. I have a really nice layer, and you should actually kind of see the print already shine through the paint. Then you know that your layer of paint is thin enough. So I can already see her face. Paper, and now rubbing. Oh, I see somebody asking, does it work with photos? Well, it does. You cannot put photo paper on the gel plate. It will totally stick to the plate and never get off again. So I would never do that. I have seen people doing it with laser prints, but I didn't have any really good results with laser prints, unfortunately. So I couldn't do it with my, oh, look at this. So this is why we do it. This is why I do this technique, because how cool is this? I think this is really cool. So here you see this little area there. That's the little area where I said I felt that my brayer stuck to the plate and it took away the ink. And I could have rubbed a little bit more, because as you can see, there's still a little bits of ink where I not necessarily wanted them. But I can go in there with paint or markers or pencils or watercolor or whatever I want and clean that up if I want that. But it's almost like an old movie, like I don't know, a still from an old movie with the grain or something. So this is the technique with the ink. And as I said, this works with the majority of the magazines and the brochures and whatever I tried. I tried a lot of them, and most of them worked with the ink technique. But then there's also the technique where you use only paint, and I'm also going to show you that one. Because it's a little bit different. It's what I can say basically is that maybe when you use the ink, you get more details. Like, for instance, here that you can see all the hair, all the details in the hair, and even in the lips here, and you can see the eyelashes. So with paint, usually it's a little bit less detailed. But yeah, using paint is also fun. So let's do first one with text again and paint, and then I'm going to do a picture also with paint, and then I'm also going to show you some of my finished image transfers, how I use them in my art journal, and what you can do with them. So this is the tricky one, and this is the one where you have to figure out which paints works for you, with which magazine, because that's also something. I mean, this paint could for instance work perfectly with my Elle magazine, but would maybe totally not work with my Folk magazine. It doesn't make any sense. There's no way you can predict what is going to work. So just try all your different paints with your different magazines and write it down. So what I did, I will show you. I'm just going to put this aside for a moment. So what I did is I made all these different prints and I stapled them to the page that I took the print from, and I wrote down what the magazine is and what the paint is that I used to pull the print. So I have all these different prints, and I can just look at how well they worked, and so I tried all the different magazines with all the different paints and all the different inks, and now I can see which paints work well with which magazine and which don't work so well. So I have this whole stash of prints and tryouts. But at least now I can just go through there, and if I have a magazine, I can look it up and I can see which paint is best to use with that magazine. That makes life a lot easier. Okay, so paint. Let's see. So this is Winsor & Newton, and this is for me a new paint to do image transfers with. So I haven't really tried it. So let's see what happens. So for this layer also, don't make your layer too thick, but sometimes you have a magazine that you actually want to make your layer a little bit thicker because the paper is so absorbent that you can hardly put your paper on top of the plate, and it's like soaking up all the paint and nothing is left behind on the plate. Other magazines might totally resist all of the paint and need a lot of rubbing to actually soak up any of the paint. So for those magazines you need a thinner layer. It's complicated, I know, but it's worth figuring out how it works. So look at this, how easily this is going to absorb the paint and how crisp the transfer is on the plate. I can even see the really thin letters down here. So, and here I had this little blob of paint that I didn't roll out really well, so that stayed there. It was not absorbed by the magazine paper. So I'm just going to try very carefully to get rid of that. here's also a little. So this needed almost no rubbing. I put the paper down and I just pushed it, and that was it. So as I said, you have to place the paper down and kind of right away lift up a little bit of the paper to see how well that magazine is absorbing that specific paint. So it looks to me that the Winsor & Newton is very well absorbed by the paper, and also is leaving a very nice and crisp image behind. Now this paint needs to dry, because if I would put paint right away on top and start rolling, I would just mix it with the paint on the plate, and I would totally lose the image. So I don't know how fast this paint dries, but I would use paint that dries fast for this technique. I would not use, for instance, Golden Open, because this needs to dry and you will have to wait forever until an open paint is dry. So it's better to use a paint that's drying rather quickly. And I'm just carefully going to touch the paint to see if it's dry, and it looks dry to me. So now I'm going to add another layer of paint to pull the print. And again, I'm going to add some color too, to create an interesting background. The paper. The paper I'm using, by the way, is a heavy copier paper. So it's heavier than the regular printer paper. But the regular printer paper is also really good for this technique. But basically you can do it on any paper, even on like, ooh, I like this. That's nice, isn't it? So you can even do it on book paper or music paper. Let's do one more on book paper, and then I'm going to show you how I use my prints in my art journal. So let's take a sheet of or a book paper, or let's do some music paper, and let's find a nice photo. Would this fit on here? I think it fits on there. Let's just try. And I'm going to use the same paint because it worked so well. And I want this to work right now because you are watching. Although I'm not really sure if the contrast is enough in this photo because there are a lot of gray tones. But there's only one way to find out, right? I'm going to place this on here and very lightly smooth out my print from the middle to the edges. And checking if it needs any more rubbing. So obviously here are more gray tones, so there is staying more paint behind than it was before with the black and white text picture. I'm not so sure about this one. I don't think that this is a good one, so I don't want to waste my music paper on that one. I'm just going to print it on some copier paper, and then I'm trying another one for the music paper. And I was right. This is not a good one. This is like a real failure. I can't even, I can't make anything of this. I can't even fix this. So this is one that goes, well, it doesn't have to go in the bin because I can obviously print over it and make it a nice print, but this is not a good transfer. So let's try another one. How about I have one left here, one prepared plate with ink. On the other hand, it's already, I only have 10 minutes left. Okay, I think it's better if I show you now what you can do with your prints. I mean, I have showed the ways to pull them. And this is going to be recorded when I end the live. Then it will be, you can watch it as a recorded version, and you can go back and see how I did the different prints. And also there are 2 videos on YouTube channel, Gelli Arts YouTube channel, showing both techniques. So there's one showing the technique with the acrylic paint, and there's one showing the technique with the Stazon. So you can also go there and watch the 2 separate techniques. So this is one print, a magazine print from Elle. As you can see, you can still see a little bit of the letters. And this was also not a perfect print, but I just went in there with my watercolor markers. No, my watercolor pencils. And I just colored a print. And then for me, this was good enough to go in my art journal on this colorful background. And here I have some, so this one I made this afternoon, and this one is made with the black Stazon, and I was so happy when I pulled this print because I think this is really amazing. So the text I wrote in there, the writing I wrote in there afterwards with a black pen, and I colored the lips and added some eyeshadow and a little bit of color in the face. So that's what I started, but it's so this is not finished yet. I can work on it, and I can create an art journal page out of it and then put it in my journal. And then I have another one that I pulled this afternoon that I was really happy with. Here, I don't know if you can see it, but there's this line going from the top to the bottom. This was also where my brayer did not have enough paint all around, and I kind of lifted up the ink before I added the paint. So there was not enough ink in this area to give a good transfer. But I simply took a blue pencil, and then I colored in this area that wasn't dark enough to make it stand out more. But the one thing that came out perfectly in this print is the eye, which is the most important part. Everything else you can fix, but the eye, if you do a face, the eye is the most important part. I think I consider this and this a perfect print. And let me see. So here's another one that I pulled from a magazine, and I did the same as I did here with the colors. So I used a yellow, a white, and a pink to pull the print, and the ink on the plate was the midnight blue Stazon, and the distressed edges you see here, they are from leftover paint on the plate. So I actually made this transfer on a dirty plate, something like this. So I used the plate that I had used before to print tags, like I did on this plate, as you can see, and the leftover paint around the clean area picked up in my print, and that created the distressed look around the edges, which I really, really like. And then here I have another one that wasn't really like a perfect print, but I just went in there with pencils and added some color, but even I highlighted some of I outlined some areas to make them stand out more. So this is, here you can see that a print doesn't have to be perfect to create something nice with them. And then here's another one. This one is even, this had a little area here that didn't pull, or where there was no ink on the plate, and it's a little bit weird light area there in the eye, but I think that gives a certain feel to the image, and I kind of like it. Let me see, what color is the blue paint? So the blue paint that did the really nice, I suppose you mean the one that did the really nice text. It's called Prussian Blue U from Winsor and Newton. This is mirrored, but Winsor and Newton Prussian Blue U. Then there are some questions about heat tools and hair dryers, and well, it's not recommended. The gel plate is made from a material that can actually melt when it gets too hot, so it's not recommended doing that. You should not add any heat to your gel plate. Can you lift your last print with watercolor paper? Yes, you can. There's a but. If you have watercolor paper that is very textured, then you will get little white areas in your print, because in the lower areas the paper will not pick up the paint from the plate. So if that's okay with you, if you like it, it gets a little bit more distressed look, and if you are okay with it, you can do it. And otherwise you have to make sure that you have a watercolor paper that has very little texture. But you can totally print on watercolor paper. I've done it a lot. It's nice and sturdy, so you can create nice books out of watercolor paper. I see somebody asking if you can print your own photos, and as I said before, I have seen people doing image transfers with laser prints, But then also it's a matter of the right paper that you print your photo on, the right paper that you print on, the right paint. And I have not found a way to do image transfers with laser prints that is satisfying enough for me. And that's basically, I think, because they are never like really perfect. And if you pull if you do image transfers with photos of people that you actually know, then for me somehow they are not satisfying enough. But you can totally try. I mean, it will not harm your plate or anything. So yeah, just print some, do some laser prints and try. It will not work with. I don't think it will work well with inkjet prints because inkjet print is water soluble. So probably when you place it on the plate, the ink will start to run and you will not get like a really nice and crisp image then. Can you use cardstock? Yes, you can use cardstock, but it's the same as with the watercolor paper. If it has a lot of texture, you will see it in your print, and cardstock is usually quite absorbent. So it doesn't matter for the final print. That doesn't matter really. It might be that you need a little bit more paint to pull the print, but in general, that would totally be possible to use cardstock. Okay. Okay. Well, I think that's it for now. I will go through the comments probably tomorrow and see if there are any important questions that I need to answer. Meanwhile, you can just also go to the YouTube Gelli Arts YouTube channel and find the videos with these techniques and many, many, many other techniques that are worth trying. I hope you enjoyed today. And one more thing I want to say is that next week I will be live on the Michael's website with the Michael's Zoom class. It's free. You just have to sign up to be able to attend. And you can find on the Gelli Arts blog the events calendar where you can see when and what time I will be live there. And that's it for now. I wish you a wonderful day and I hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye. Bye.